All right. So I hope I'm live right now, properly audible and visible. Just confirm me so that I can proceed. Is anyone in the session? Okay, Priyanka. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. So in last class, we have started our topic on budget. And in that budget, what I told you, there is a consolidated fund of India, right? And under that fund, government's all expenditures and receipt must be from this fund only, and government need an approval of parliament through law. So that is why government presents annual financial statement in the parliament, and in this annual financial statement, government have to present all its expenditure and receipts, right? Then article 113 of Constitution. Article 113 of Constitution tells us government must have to present what? Detailed of its expenditure, and the expenditure must be presented in two ways. One is expenditure charged upon, and other is from consolidated fund of India, right? And apart from that, that expenditure must be presented in the form of what? Revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Okay, so once you are going to present that expenditure, after that government have to present under article 114, government have to present appropriation bill. Government have to present appropriation bill. Government have to present appropriation bill. So what is appropriation bill? Appropriation bill means first you have presented a statement. Under that statement you have defined these are the expenditures, and these are the revenue expenditure, these are the capital expenditure, these are the expenditure which are charged upon consolidated fund, these are the expenditure from consolidated fund. What I told you, charge upon, the expenditure which can be discussed but not voted in the parliament. Expenditure discussed as well as voted, they are known as expenditure from the consolidated fund. So you have explained the nature of the expenditure. Now, because as per condition presented under consolidated fund of India, you have to make a law. You have to make a law in order to withdraw the money for the expenditure purpose. So in order to make a law, government presents appropriation bill. In that appropriation bill, government take a formal approval from the parliament in order to withdraw money for its expenditure which they have mentioned under article 113. Right. So this is the purpose of appropriation bill. And once the appropriation bill is passed, government generally present finance bill. Right. So finance bill is presented by the government under article 117. So under 117, government present finance bill, and in the finance bill, government present all the provisions related to its source of receipts. To spend the money, from where and how much government is going to present, how the government is going to get the money, that is presented by whom? That is presented by the government under the system of finance bill. Under the system of finance bill. So finance bill is presented by the government for the purpose of what? Finance bill is presented by the government for the purpose of showing where and how much government is going to receive. So in this way, this is the process of presentation and passing of the budget in the parliament. Generally, they are not going to ask this question. Let's check how many of you can answer this question. Can you tell me, budget, is there any obligation on the government to pass the budget in the given days? Is there any obligation on government to pass the budget in particular time? Is there any obligation on the government? If you have presented the budget, that budget must be passed in the given time? Yes. Abhishek Walia is saying that yes. If yes, then how much time? How much time? How much time? $30 ये नहीं पता सर. अच्छा. Just give me a second. I have to make one important call. Urgent call is there. Just give me a second. अच्छा ठीक है ठीक है ठीक है. All right. So once the budget is presented, this budget must be passed by the government within 75 days. So there is an obligation of government to present the budget within 75 days. Okay, why in 75 days? Because the finance bill which is presented by the government, there is an obligation on the government to pass this finance bill within 75 days. Government have to present the finance bill, and once it is presented, it must be passed within 75 days. So if the finance bill must be passed within the 75 days, automatically, because the other part of the budget is already passed, then the part of finance bill, if it must be passed within the 75 days, automatically the entire budget is going to be passed within 75 days. So in this way, government must pass the budget within 75 days. Okay, is it clear? So just give me a second. So now if you will see the finance part of this budget, this budget can be presented into two parts, that is revenue budget and capital budget. Here revenue expenditure, here revenue receipts. In the capital budget, capital expenditure and capital receipts. Fine. Sometimes you can see the same thing in this way. Budget, and this budget is expenditure and receipts, and expenditures are like revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Here the receipts are going to be like revenue receipts and capital receipts. So in this way they present the expenditure and receipts. Okay, so either you can mention the revenue and capital budget, or you can mention if it is not passed then automatically pass consider करेंगे क्या? नहीं. If it is not passed, government, it is considered that the government do not have the majority in the house. So either opposition party or president can ask the government to prove its majority. Generally, opposition parties are going to push the government to prove its majority because you are not able to fulfill your constitutional obligation. Right, so this is the political process is going to start in such cases if government is not able to pass that thing in the stipulated amount of time. Okay, so when we talk about the revenue expenditure and capital expenditure, I told in the last class also, the revenue expenditure means those expenditures which are obligation or for welfare purpose. These expenditures are known as what? These expenditures are known as revenue expenditure. So that is why expenditure like interest payments, health, education, defense, all these kind of the expenditures, they come under the category of what? They come under the category of revenue expenditure. Whereas expenditures like expenditure on infrastructure like railways, highways, seaport, airport, all these expenditures come under the category of what? Infrastructure, and infrastructure is going to have a potential generate income. So all those expenditures which are having a capacity to develop or potential to increase the income, all these expenditures are known as capital expenditure. That is why infrastructure expenditure is considered as a category of capital expenditure. One more example, dedicated freight corridor. India is developing a kind of dedicated tracks, railway tracks for the purpose of what? For the purpose of freight train movement, goods train movement, and that infrastructure is known as dedicated freight corridor. Bharatmala, Sagarmala project, all these projects are considered as what? All these projects are considered as a project through which India is aspiring to develop a world-class infrastructure in order to accelerate the transportation in India. If you will compare all G20 countries, right? In all G20 countries, the way the transportation is used in India for logistic movement. For the logistic movement, India's logistic movement is one of the slowest in among the G20 countries. So what it means that when the goods are moving from one place to another place, still despite being a lot of effort made by the government, still you are the slowest in among G20 countries in terms of logistic movement. So this is why still it is a requirement of having projects like dedicated freight corridor, Sagarmala, Bharatmala kind of the project. And because of these projects are very important in the nature, facts are going to be asked in your exam. So what is Bharatmala project or what is Sagarmala project? Such kind of the information you always keep in your mind in order to answer these questions, whether you are going to appear in the RBI or any other GA related questions. Understood? So this is the nature of revenue expenditure and this is the nature of capital expenditure. Now when we talk about the receipts, when we talk about what? Receipts, they are also of two types, revenue receipts and capital receipts. Revenue receipts are further classified into two categories. They are further classified into two categories, and the two categories are non-tax receipts and tax receipts. These tax receipts are further classified into direct taxes and indirect taxes. Fine. So first let's understand the tax receipt. So can anyone explain me what is tax? कोई बताएगा मुझे what is tax? What is tax? Let's see who is going to answer. What is tax? No answer at here. चलो तब तक मैं पानी पी लेता हूँ. कोई नहीं बताएगा. ओहो. It's a kind of charge for of services provided by the government. Amount of money that government requires people to pay. Acha. Any other answer? What is tax? Sir, mandatory charge that is required to be paid by the citizens. Only citizens or companies also? Citizens to the government, okay. Depending on their income and profit which is being used for the government expenditure. Sir, companies, local bodies. Acha, good, very good. Regarding tax, okay, the tax in Hindi, it is known as kar, right? Kar, that is tax. So in ancient Indian text, that is Abhigyan Shakuntalam, okay? Abhigyan Shakuntalam written by Kalidas. In that text, Kalidas mentioned the way sun by its heat evaporate the water, absorb it in terms of the steam, and then return it back to the earth in terms of rain. जिस प्रकार सूर्य अपनी किरणों से पानी को सोखता है और फिर बादलों के माध्यम से, बारिश के माध्यम से वापस कर देता है, राजा को भी उसी प्रकार से कर लगाना चाहिए अपनी जनता पर. The way the sun is going to absorb the water and then it is going to return that water in terms of the rain, that same principle must be used by who? King, while collecting the taxes. So this is the thing he have explained in that text. Though that was not for the purpose of economics, but because he is talking about many things, and he also talked about the same thing in his Abhigyan Shakuntalam. In modern days, it was Adam Smith. Adam Smith, he explained how and what is tax and how it should be implemented. For that, Adam Smith used the term canon of taxation. So when he used the term canon, which is referred to the gun barrel, canon of taxation, he was very clear, tax is mandatory contribution. It is mandatory contribution towards the government. Mandatory contribution, not voluntary contribution. It is a mandatory contribution made by the people, whether they are individual or they are company, they have to go for mandatory contribution towards the government. If that mandatory contribution is not being made, government have an authority to take certain legal action, right? So the tax is a mandatory contribution by the people and companies of that country towards the government, right? So here it is very important to use the term mandatory contribution when you are defining the tax, right? So when the tax is being paid, right, it can be paid in two ways, directly or indirectly, right? But that is not a proper way to define. When we use the term tax, we use two terms: incidence of tax, right? The term is incidence of tax, and other term is obligation, or not obligation, better word is burden of tax. Incidence of tax and burden of tax. So incidence of tax means on whom tax is imposed. On whom tax is imposed. Burden of tax, who is going to pay tax, on whom the burden is and who is going to pay the tax. If if incidence and burden is on same person, it is direct tax. If the incidence and burden is on same person, it is a direct tax. But if incidence and burden is on different person, then it is known as indirect tax. Fine. Then it is known as what? Then it is known as indirect tax. For example, GST. So, in the case of GST, tax is imposed on producer and seller. But burden is on consumer. So tax is imposed on production and selling activity, but ultimately it must be paid by whom? It must be paid by the person who is finally purchasing that good, that is consumer. Then GST is what? It is indirect tax. Whereas the person who is earning the income, they have to pay what? Income tax. That is why income tax is what? Direct tax. So when the incidence and the burden is on same person, it is direct tax. When the incidence and burden is on two different people, then it is what? Then it is indirect tax. So direct tax and indirect tax, in this way we do define the taxes. Right. Now, first let's know some prominent direct taxes in India. Direct tax. So the most prominent direct tax is income tax, right? And this income tax is of two types. One is personal income tax and income tax on companies. This is precisely known as corporate tax, whereas in common parlance it is known as what? Income tax. So when people are referring the term income tax, it is actually referring the tax on individual, whereas corporate tax depicts or presents the tax on whom? The tax on entities and companies. And in India there is Income Tax Act 1961. So when government presents finance bill every year, when the finance bill is presented, in that finance bill government proposes many of the changes in what? Income tax, because of different reasons. So Income Tax Act is considered as one of the mother act in India in order to define the direct taxes. Fine. So that is why when you will see the finance bill, lot of changes, addition, deletion is mentioned in the finance bill. So how this Income Tax Act works in India? Before understanding how this income tax works in India, first let's know one very important feature with respect to the taxation, right? So suppose that person he received the income. So once he received the income, he is going to use for consumption purpose and also going to use for what? Saving purpose. So if this income is being taxed, and you went for what? Consumption. That consumption is also taxed, and you went for the saving. That saving is also taxed. So it is TTT model, tax model. Whereas if the person has earned the income, this income is exempted. Consumption also exempted from the tax, savings also exempted from the tax. So these are two extreme model. These are two extreme model, TTT model and III model. These are the two extreme model. No tax and full tax. Whether you are generating income or you are doing the consumption or you are doing the savings, all these consumption, savings, each and everything is going to be what? Each and everything is going to be taxed. So there is model under which each and everything is going to be taxed. For example, if you are having the income more than 10 lakh rupees, then definitely your income will be taxed. After getting the income more than 10 lakh, you have to pay the tax on your income. When you are going to consume the food in the restaurants, you have to pay the taxes on the consumption. And if your savings are of having more than 2.5 lakh, then on those savings you also have to pay the tax. That is triple T model. Whereas if you have income of 1 lakh rupees, then income is not going to be taxed. And when you are going to consume the street food, generally that is being served by the local vendors or hawkers, tax is not included, consumption is also not taxed. जैसे आप मैकडॉनल्ड्स पे बर्गर खाए और वही बर्गर अगर आप किसी बाहर ठेले पे, रेडी पटरी पे या बंडी पे, in Telugu it is bandi, in north we will call this रेडी पटरी, especially in the Delhi region, and in UP Bihar it is called as thela, right? So if you are going to consume that burger there, then you are not supposed to pay the tax on it. So it is going to be what? It is going to be consumption without any taxation. But the same kind of the burger, if you are going to eat in the McDonald's, then they will also apply the GST. Okay. Sir, professional tax क्यों deduct होता है? I will explain. But professional tax अभी थोड़ा सा दूर है, तो अभी professional tax पे नहीं चलते हैं. ठीक है? अभी जो हम कर रहे हैं पहले उसको अच्छे से समझ लेते हैं. When the professional tax will come, I'll explain you why it is being imposed. Or at the end of the class, I will explain if you want the answer today. But first understand here the TTT model and II model. So generally, when the person is of having higher income, then they come under the category of triple T model. Whereas when the person is of having low income, then they generally come under this category of III. Exempted, sorry, not III, E. Sorry, it is E, exempted and exempted. Not I, it is E. So basically it is triple T model and triple E model. Exempted, consumption, tax. So those people who are in the higher income section, they have to pay by this model, and those who are in the low income, they are going to be exempted. Right? So in this way, not PPE, it is triple T or triple E. Acha. One more thing you have to understand here, when we define the taxes, they are like direct taxes and indirect taxes, right? But one more way is there to define the taxes, that is progressive tax, regressive tax, and neutral tax. ठीक है? Progressive tax, rate of tax increases as increase in income. Regressive tax, rate of tax decreases as increase in income. Neutral tax or proportional tax. So it doesn't matter whether income is increasing or decreasing, a fixed amount of tax you have to pay. Where is in the progressive tax? For example, if you will take that thing on the curve, income and tax. So as income is going to rise, tax rate is also going to rise. So it is progressive tax. Whereas when income starts increasing, then you have to pay the lower amount of the tax. So when your income is low, you have to pay the higher tax, and when income is going to increase, your tax rate is also going to not increase, but tax rate is going to decrease. Then it is known as regressive tax. Whereas in the case of what? Proportional taxation, doesn't matter what is your income, low or high, you have to pay a fixed amount of tax for say X% of the income. It is going to be what? Proportional tax. जैसे स्कूल में होता था ना, स्कूल टाइम में जनरली व्हाट हैपन व्हेन टीचर इज गोइंग टू मेक मींस अब आजकल तो स्पेशली इन द प्राइवेट स्कूल्स हार्डली दिस प्रैक्टिस इज बीइंग देयर, बट स्कूल टाइम में क्या है कि व्हेन टीचर इज गोइंग टू गिव द पनिशमेंट, टीचर जब पिटाई करने की बारी आई बच्चों को, तो लड़कों की जम की कुटाई हुई और लड़कियों को छोड़ दिया गया. ठीक है, अरे प्यारी सी बच्ची है, रहने दो, मत मारो. बट देयर आर द सम टीचर्स हु गिव द इक्वल पनिशमेंट, और जब लड़कियों की पिटाई होती थी तो बड़ा मजा आता था. ठीक है, सो दिस प्रोपोर्शनल टैक्सेशन इज लाइक व्हाट? दिस प्रोपोर्शनल टैक्सेशन इज लाइक a tax where it doesn't matter how much income you have. Sometimes students ask you what is the purpose of regressive taxation. The regressive taxation, generally this regressive taxation is visible in the activity of production and sales. So once the production is going to rise, if we will apply the progressive tax, so when you are producing less amount of product, then you have to pay less amount of tax. When you start going for more production, then you have to pay more taxes. No, it is going to create a problem, because every time the production is going to increase, the cost of that product is going to increase. So this is why in the case of production and sales kind of the activity, generally we use the system of regressive taxation or the proportional taxation. For example, in the case of GST in India, so if GST is 18% or 28%, for example, if you are purchasing air conditioner, you have to pay 28% of GST, right? So doesn't matter this AC is of 1 ton or 2 ton, right? Are you going to purchase one AC, or are you going to purchase 10 AC or 50 AC? You have to pay the flat tax rate of 28%. So the quantity doesn't matter here. A flat rate of taxation is being applied. Whereas if you are going to purchase mobile phone, then that tax rate is going to be 18%, whether you are going to purchase a Apple or Vivo. 18% tax is being applicable. So generally, in order to promote production activity, sales activity, country generally uses regressive taxation or proportional taxation. Whereas in the case of income, it is progressive tax is implemented by the government. Understood this thing? समझ में आया ये? Progressive tax, regressive tax. Is I am corrected or not? Just not getting any response from you. thing we have to understand here is optimum rate of taxation. Optimum rate of taxation, we have to understood what is optimum rate of taxation. Generally what happens, even in the case of progressive tax. So in the case of progressive tax, if income increases, tax rate also increases. If income increases, tax rate increases. So generally, if the rate of taxation is increasing every time, if the rate of taxation is increasing every time with the increase in the tax rate, then tax revenue, then this tax revenue also going to what? Also going to increase. Why? Suppose that rate of tax is 10%. Income is 1 lakh. So 10,000 have to be paid in terms of what? Tax. Now income is increased from 1 lakh to 10 lakh and you have increased the tax rate to 15%. So from now you are going to get 1.5 lakh rupees as a taxable amount. So every time the rate of taxation increases, the tax revenue also increases. However, one economist, he suggested that this is not going to happen. What he did, he used one curve, right? He used one curve and he said that tax revenue and tax rate. So he said that once the tax rate will start increasing, initially once the tax rate is going to start increasing, initially tax revenue also increases, but after certain point of time it starts decreasing. It starts decreasing. So this is the point where we have what? Highest tax revenue. And this tax rate is known as optimum tax rate. This tax rate is known as optimum tax rate. And this curve was given by American economist Arthur Laffer. What Laffer have explained? Actually, he has explained what happened in 1960s. US government started increasing the tax rate. US government ने क्या किया? US government has started increasing the tax rate in order to get more tax revenue. So in order to get more tax revenue, US government started what? Increasing the tax rate. But once the US government started increasing the tax rate, the tax revenue of government rather than going to increase starts falling. So people was puzzled कि we have increased the tax rate, but despite increasing the tax rate, why the tax revenue are falling? So Laffer said that when government is going to increase tax rate too much, then people will start tax evasion and tax avoidance. So tax evasion means कर की चोरी, tax की चोरी. Avoidance means you have used certain ways in order to avoid the tax, right? So these two things starts happening when government is consistently going to increase the tax. How this tax avoidance being done? For example, if your country's government is consistently increasing the tax rate, then maybe companies are going to shift their production line from that country to another country where the tax rate is low. Right? So this is an example of tax avoidance. You have avoided the tax by shifting the production line from high tax country to low tax countries. Whereas in the case of evasion, you have manipulated your data, you have a higher income, but by the manipulation of the data, you have shown the less income on the papers. In that way, you have paid less amount of tax. So in this way, when government try to increase tax rate too much, then people start tax evasion and avoidance, and this evasion and avoidance generally led to what? This evasion and avoidance, this is going to lead to what? This is going to lead to, rather than increase in the tax revenue, but in decrease in the tax revenue. That is going to decrease the tax revenue. Okay, so this is why government should not increase the tax rate beyond certain limit. So this is one of the reason why 2 years back government has announced to decrease the corporate tax. So it was suggested to the government of India, whatever the tax rate in terms of corporate tax rate which you have, it is already over and above the optimum tax rate. So here it is optimum tax rate. यहाँ पर क्या है? This is the optimum tax rate. This point is optimum tax rate, and at present you are here. So if you will move your tax rate from this point to this point, your taxable income is going to rise. Right now you are having this amount of tax revenue, but if you will decrease the tax rate, you are going to have this amount of tax revenue. So considering this point, government has started reducing the corporate tax in India. Understood this? Have you understood? समझ में आया कि what is optimum tax rate? The tax rate on which the taxable income is going to be higher, the highest tax revenue you are going to receive on what? Optimum tax rate. How it works? You have to reach at that point of tax rate where the tax income is going to be highest, right? And the taxes are of basically three types: progressive, regressive, and proportional taxation. Generally, acha, one more thing, sometimes you have heard this word tax havens. So tax havens, what are the tax havens? Generally, tax havens have regressive taxation on income. Regressive taxation on income. So the regressive taxation on income means that if you have very huge amount of income, then you have to pay less amount of tax, right? So you can accumulate your income in those areas, you can park your income in those areas where the tax rate is regressive in the nature on the income. For example, Cayman Islands. So Cayman Islands is a place where government is going to use what? Very low rate of taxation, and this very low rate of taxation attracts those people who want to hide their income, right? Who want to hide their income. That is what? That is regressive taxation, and they are known as tax haven. So basically tax haven का मतलब क्या है? Where you have to pay the less amount of taxation, that is known as tax havens. जहां पर आप अपने taxes को बचा सकते हो, these places are known as tax havens. Okay, so how this tax is being implemented, what are the other things related to the tax, I have explained you today. Tomorrow what I will do, I will explain all the prominent taxes including the GST. So anyone who is having any kind of the confusion with respect to any kind of the tax, for example windfall tax, which is coming again and again in the news. So what is windfall tax, how it works, how the GST will work, what is corporate tax, each and everything I am going to explain in the next class. Fine. So today I am going to wind it up here, but tomorrow I'll take the session. In that session, I am going to explain all type of the taxes. Fine. Chalo. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow. सर डबल टैक्स एवॉइडेशंस भी इसमें होगा. यस यस यस, डबल टैक्स एवॉइडेशन आई एम आल्सो गोइंग टू एक्सप्लेन इन दैट. डबल टैक्स एवॉइडेशन आई एम आल्सो गोइंग टू एक्सप्लेन इन दिस. ठीक है, चलो देन, सी यू टुमारो. बाय, गुड नाइट.